All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Lean in Vancouver 2020 Men and Women Lean In panel. My name is Alicia, and I am the speakers lead for Lean in Vancouver. I will be the moderator for today's discussion. Before we begin, for any of you who are not current members of Lean In and who want to be notified of future events and other initiatives, please go to leanincanada.com and click the big red Join Lean in Canada button. I just want to start off today's discussion by thanking each of our panelists for volunteering their time to share their insights and advance this discussion. If any attendee has a question throughout the presentation, you can send the Lean in Canada account a private message or put a question in the live chat, and we will do our best to address all inquiries throughout the presentation and in the Q&A portion at the end of the event. Without further ado, I would love to invite each of the panelists to introduce themselves. Kerris, would you like to go first?
Sure, thanks, Alicia. So my name is Kerris Hougardy. I'm the Vice President of People Services for Colliers International North America. I've been with Colliers for about 3.5 years now. It's a global commercial real estate firm, multifaceted from brokerage, sales and leasing through to property management, valuations, appraisals and consulting. I look after our North American HR team across all of the different functional areas. And I also sit as an executive champion on our North American Diversity and Inclusion Program. Thanks for having me.
Perfect. Clayton, would you like to go next?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Clayton Buckingham. I am the Chief Financial Officer at Vancity. I've been with the organization for about 1.5 years, and couldn't have made a better choice to come here. Really excited about the topic today. This is generally equality, inclusion, and how we can get the best out of organizations is a passion of mine, and I look forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Raj, would you like to go next?
Sounds good. Thanks, Alicia. Hi, everyone. I'm also very excited to be here today. My name is Raj Verhundel, and I am a partner with PwC Canada and also our BC Region Technology Leader. So I work with companies of all sizes, from early stage to high growth and large multinational companies, both public and private. And I really enjoy working with high growth companies because there's a lot of value that you can add as you work with these companies through their growing and scaling journeys. So I'm really passionate about diversity and inclusion and look forward to our discussion this evening. So thank you very much for having me.
Of course. And last but certainly not least, Rob, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Alicia. My name is Rob Doyle. I'm the CFO of Pan American Silver. That's a role I've had for about 17 years. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this wonderful event. As a white male, I am the first to acknowledge that I've had more than my share of opportunities and privilege through my career, and I really do hope that I can contribute to a more even playing field for the future. Thanks. I look forward to the conversation.
Perfect. So now we'll jump right in. So I wanted to ask each and every one of you what gender diversity in the workplace and representation at every level means to you. Ultimately, is the optimal picture to have equal representation? Raj, would you like to start with this one?
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Alicia. So to me, it's important that as an organization, PwC Canada represents the communities we serve. So if we look at Vancouver or Canada as a whole, there are various forms of diversity, including gender, different cultural backgrounds, and other forms of diversity as well. So, when we think of diversity, we need to make sure that, we're considering the different forms of diversity, and that, we are being inclusive from all those different perspectives. So, to be successful in driving diversity in an organization, it needs to be treated not just as a human capital or human resource or diversity and inclusion initiative, but it's really a business imperative. At PwC, our purpose is to solve important problems, and we can only do that when everyone is represented at the table, helping to solve those important problems and bringing their different perspectives and insights and experiences. So those are my thoughts there.
Does anyone else have any thoughts on equal representation?
I can jump in and agree absolutely with what Raj was saying. I think that gender diversity in the workplace is absolutely critical. But I think that, we need to think bigger than that, because of, when we think from a perspective of intersectionality, it isn't just a gender issue, it is a full diversity and inclusion issue. So we need to be really mindful of the fact that advancing women in our organization actually has implications across all of the demographics that we want to be able to tap into. So yes, it's absolutely critical, but it does need to be part of a broader conversation around diversity. And I think that Colliers is a pretty values-driven organization. One of our values is do what's right for our clients, communities, and our people. And when we think about that and the representation we have within our organization, the communities in which we operate, and the clients with which we work, it's a business imperative for us to make sure that we're representing everybody across the board in order to, not just be successful, but be able to provide the kind of guidance and advice and consultation with our clients that has a diverse level of thinking.
I couldn't agree more, and I thought Raj put it really well, that we're solving really important and difficult problems here, and that the best way to solve those is with diverse perspective, diverse origins, and just a different view of the world than sometimes we typically bring to it. I think the one thing that I would just say to the specific question is that it's not just about equal representation. Certainly we do need to get there, but we do need to be make sure that we're actually increasing our effectiveness by harnessing that diversity and making sure that we get that different perspective from each group. And that means removing barriers. That means making sure that it's a comfortable place to work for all. That means that we're really listening and being empathetic to the needs of all groups and all people.
Yeah, absolutely. Clayton nailed it there. And that's where the inclusiveness is so critical. The diversity for the sake of it is we need more than that. We need the diversity to be harnessed and nurtured, so that everyone can bring their best self to their work every day and be happy and productive.
For sure. So kind of on that note as well then, when you all started out in your careers, how would you say that the hiring and promotion process has changed over time? And have you seen a lot of improvement? Have you seen growth as well? Rob, maybe I'll pass it back to you as well. Start us off.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's a totally different world, thankfully, because the practices of the past were really ensuring that the status quo was perpetuated, and so the idea of hiring someone that thinks like you and wouldn't rock the boat. Someone within your network, that those are very common themes, and now, of course, the concept of diversity and inclusion is, as we've just touched on, in order to solve complex problems, we need to be thinking completely outside of that and bringing in different perspectives. So yeah, it's changed completely and for the better. The whole concept of unconscious bias was just not around. I think we just lived with that, and so yeah, I'm really happy to see all the changes that have taken place.
Actually, does anyone else have anything?
Sorry.
Yeah, go for it.
A lot of good formal changes to policies and practice along the way, but I do think just what Rob was mentioning there about the recognition of unconscious bias, I think, is perhaps one of the most meaningful changes that we've made at least in organizations that I've worked in the past few years, where a real understanding that we may not be intentionally creating barriers for individuals, but we may unintentionally be doing so by virtue of just how we've typically characterized the type of individual that we need for a role, even just how we craft job descriptions and postings that go out into the market, and even the way in which we communicate those, and really being more thoughtful and forcing ourselves or challenging ourselves to think about it in a different way, I think is good progress. We're certainly not all the way there. I don't think we recognize quite the level of systemic barriers that we still create, but at least it's coming more top of mind than it was before.
Yeah, I would agree. And to layer on top of that, I spent the first nearly 20 years of my career working on the recruitment and talent acquisition side of things. So, from when I first started out in the recruitment industry, a lot has changed. When I think back to, the time when everybody was talking about culture fit, and individuals needed to be the right culture fit, and it was all about culture fit, and oh no, sorry, we can't hire that person, they're not the right fit. And that seems abhorrent now, that that was such a promoted practice, and at the same time talking about networks and referrals. And yes, everybody has to have this amazing internal employee referral system. Everybody knows that employees that have been referred internally stay longer, and there's all this science and stats around it. But at the same time, all of those two things do is just perpetuate the fact that individuals hire people that look and sound like themselves, and that culture fit is actually not really as helpful as we've realized. And that actually, adding value from a diversity perspective is actually way more valuable than just ensuring that person's going to get along because they look and sound and talk and interact the same way as the rest of the team. And actually that team is the one that's going to stagnate. That team is the one that's not going to be able to come up with the innovation and creativity that organizations need today. So there's been a huge change, and I think so much more meaningful and purposeful actions in the last couple of years as well, about ensuring that we have a more diverse interview panel. The questions that we're asking are really around outcomes and deliverables, and not specific around which school somebody went to or what sports team they may have played on, and things like that, which can be incredibly uninclusive. So there's a lot of practices that have changed over the last couple of years that have had such a positive impact on this as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, all really good points raised by Kerris, Clayton, and Rob. Similar thoughts from my perspective. I guess when I step back and kind of reflect on my journey, like I remember when I started as an associate in our assurance practice, and similar to the comments that the other panelists have made, there was like a lot of focus on the networking events as a part of the recruitment process, and the focus was always around that fit, like Kerris has talked about. And similar to what Rob says, it's who was kind of within your network, who seemed to be like you. You kind of had that vision, and totally understand that working as an auditor, working together and as a team, and communication is really important. So it made sense, but it makes the process very subjective. And I think you're likely to choose people that are like you as a result. So if you look at the recruitment processes in the more recent years, for instance, if I look at what we've done at PwC, it's really trying to take out some of that subjectivity by really focusing on the skills and capabilities of the candidates. And when I now think about it, there's a technical component that we have our candidates work through, in addition to other components, really to assess the different skills and capabilities, to try to make the process more objective in terms of who reaches that final kind of interview stage. So I think this really helps with focusing on the best candidates based on skills and capabilities, and the outcome does end up being diverse hires. So if I think about myself when I started in the insurance practice, I was probably one of two female Indo-Canadians in the office. And when I now look at our new starts and our associates, I'm happy to see the diversity at all levels, from a gender perspective, from a cultural background perspective, and it's good to see that we're making that progress there.
Yeah, for sure. And then you mentioned like the different practices and different policies that are kind of put into place. But I was wondering if any of you could speak on your thoughts on maybe metrics or certain practices you've seen that have really helped, whether that was a hiring and retention practice or internal promotion, some sort of policy or metric that has helped implement broader representation. And I was hoping maybe you could speak on something you've seen that works. Raj, I might pass it back to you to start this one off.
Yeah, no, for sure. Happy to take that one. If I think about what we've done at PwC, one of the things that we've put in place is our Women in Leadership program. And that program really kind of focuses in on obviously promoting the advancement of females, and, the foundation of that program is really sponsorship. So, if I look at that program, we've had over 300 graduates from this program kind of across the country. 16% of those graduates are now partners within the organization, and 40% have, been promoted since they've graduated through the program. So, it's really important to monitor the success of these programs and assess how well they are working. And, I think there's always room for improvement. So I think that reflection and, trying to understand what can be done better is really important, because, I don't think we're perfect. I don't know if anybody is ever perfect. So there's always definitely room for improvement.
Yeah, and to that end, one of the things that we've implemented that has been quite helpful to us is we have formal employee work groups representing different identities in the workplace. And these resource groups act as both advisory resources, but also help push us to wider organizational change when that's necessary. And that forces some uncomfortable conversations. It forces us to also just quantify and evaluate areas and ask questions like, how could that group have, say, 65% female, but only 33% are in management, and just going, something's going wrong and something's happening at that tranche, and how do we make changes that need to be made? And of course, those don't happen overnight. They take some time to implement, but by forcing those questions and really digging into it, I think you get there. On top of that, you do need to have the kind of base of policies and procedures underlying that, and a lot of sort of basic practices around removing bias in interviews and things like that.
I think the other thing that we've just embarked on that's helping with that is to start collecting data. I mean, it's so hard to measure success when you don't have a foundation of metrics from which to leverage. And it's something that we launched just earlier this year at Colliers, was enabling people to be able to self-identify various diversity metrics within our HR system, completely confidential, anonymous, so only collected at an aggregate level. It's purely voluntary to do that, etc. But it will give us a foundation from which to really be able to measure the success and understand, where we need to focus our efforts, what do we need to prioritize in terms of, helping to build out that culture, and where there might be, certain gaps along, particular business lines or locations, and really focus in some awareness and education efforts in those spaces, for example. But without those underlying metrics, it's hard for businesses to be able to really kind of make that leap. So it's something we've taken really seriously and put a lot of resources behind.
Perfect. So do you think, I guess, on that note, that inequality starts more at the hiring and promotion level from what you're seeing in the data or in other practices? Or do you think inequality starts even earlier, and how can we kind of get around that? Raj, maybe I'll pass that one to you.
Maybe just, continuing on kind of on that thought process of what Kerris was talking about around, using kind of data-driven information as we look at some of these decisions. Like, when I take a look at it from a PwC perspective, using a data-driven versus a best practices approach was really key in understanding where the opportunity gaps were and what levers we could pull to have the biggest impact. So, many organizations believe that, women are leaving at mid-career to have families, and they're actually leaving for better opportunities. As career progression is the #1 reason both men and women leave. So the question was, how do we ensure we support the aspirations of all of our people to help them thrive? So when what our data also showed was that, women leave at the same rate as men, but, when we replace both men and women at the senior level, it was with more men than women. So it was further kind of imbalancing that pipeline. So, understanding the implicit biases impacting everyday decisions from, promotions to opportunities given is key to inclusive practices. And that's why, sponsorship is really key, as men are more likely to receive to have 2 times the sponsors than females. And, with sponsorship comes opportunities, networks that you wouldn't otherwise have. So again, tying back to some of the themes I think we've been touching on, but it's interesting to kind of, see that data and analyze it and see what it's actually telling and showing us.
Yeah, adding to that, I think that inequality, unfortunately, it starts way before hiring and promotion decisions. I think the stereotypes and unconscious bias that we're touching on here are deep societal problems, and that's what's leading to a lot of this sort of broken rung issues where there's a perpetuation, most likely because of the similarity bias. The person before was a man, and so the next person's got to be a man. For whatever reason, associating management traits with typical male traits. It's all of these stereotypes that we have in our society, and I think we all need to become aware of that, as Clayton was saying earlier, and a lot of that's just educating ourselves and understanding these sometimes reflex responses that we all have as the human condition. So it's becoming aware, it's making the unconscious bias conscious, and avoiding some snap judgments. Beyond the awareness, for sure, we have to also change the procedures and practices to attract a more diverse pool. And so, Kerris, you touched on some really good ideas there. I was scribbling down notes as you were talking. And then, taking a more holistic approach to succession planning. And succession planning shouldn't just be diversity and inclusion in the C-suite. It's really got to be throughout the organization, so that we're building that organization that is going to be reflective in the future of what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, and kind of touching, I know, Raj, where you mentioned sponsorship. So I guess one thing that kind of comes to my mind from that is when people are looking for sponsors that will help with advancement, what kind of qualities should we be looking for, I guess, if we should be seeking them out on our own? Do we think that maybe formalized mentorship or sponsorship programs work better? Maybe Clayton, if you could kind of touch on any sponsorship or mentorship stories you have, both personally or that you've seen kind of at Vancity as well.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, personally, I think both need to exist within organizations, because it can be, I think, unreasonable to expect everybody or people to be comfortable enough to reach out to an executive or a leader in an organization and ask them to be a sponsor. And at the same time, we can't always expect that natural connections will form to allow for that sponsorship or mentorship. So yes, there does need to be a certain amount of seeking out. And I think when you're seeking out, when individuals are seeking out, really looking for qualities like empathy and looking for listening, and really understanding that the message that is helpful in those conversations is not, hey, this is what made me successful, because what made me successful was a very different experience set than likely the individual that I'm speaking to. And it's more about, this is what will help you be successful and how to build on your skill set. And this is what you can ultimately are trying to build in order to be successful in this career or whatever career you choose. I do think that at the same time, some of those formalized structures need to be in place in order to make sure that we're creating those connections. But when they are, just being really careful about why we build the connections. Where I've seen them fall apart is when there's simply a straight up matching program to say, okay, Clayton, you're matched up with this individual. And if that connection doesn't make sense, if there isn't a linkage to the journey that the person's on, or making sure that that person can offer value to that individual, then quite frankly, you're just wasting everyone's time. And you can actually do more harm than good by trying to sort of force somebody into a predetermined way of doing things. So, because if I try to make everybody do exactly what I did in my career to be successful, I don't think that's actually going to yield that much success for individuals, because I didn't face the barriers that many others did. So I need to approach it in a different way, or help them approach it in a different way.
Yeah, I think it's there's some really good points there, Clayton. I think it's really important to differentiate between a sponsorship program or a sponsor and a mentorship program. They are very different things. I think, a sponsor is somebody that's going to say good things or great things about you behind closed doors. That individual is going to, champion you, your skills, your experience, your value, your qualities to others when you're not in the room. Whereas a mentor is really somebody to help, be a sounding board, potentially provide some insight or some advice or counsel, or at least, be a strong listener for where you're at in your current career and how you want to advance. So I think it's really important to differentiate between those. And I think that sponsors are definitely critical inside organizations, whether it's formalized or not. But I think that by often with these things, you have to formalize it in order to make it habit, and then it becomes less formal, but becomes practice. So sometimes you need a concerted effort around things like that. And I think from a mentorship perspective, we've had a women's mentorship program at Colliers for the last 5 years, I want to say. And I think 2019, the cohort that went through that, 43% of those got promoted within 12 months of being in that program. So it was really successful. And it is a matching program, but there you have to apply to be a mentor, and you have to apply to be a mentee. It's not just, okay, you turn up and we'll just randomly match you with somebody. And there needs to be a good, strong linkage in terms of what the career goals are or the development areas are of the mentee, and what the skill set is, and what the experience is of the individual that's mentoring. So there's a lot more kind of thought that goes into it, which I think is important. And then supporting both the mentees and mentors with the right kind of training to be able to be effective in their roles, because they both have responsibility for the success of that relationship, and making sure there's clear expectations and things like that. So it's I think both sponsorships and mentorships play an important part in people's careers. We've just shifted our mentorship program this year actually to be more inclusive and not just focused around women. So we're taking the kind of gender piece out of it deliberately, and I think it'll be interesting to see how that kind of pans out next year. From a personal perspective, I think advocating for yourself in terms of trying to find that sponsor, if there's not a formal program in place, is a really positive thing to do. I think that it's important to be able to have those kind of relationships to develop in your career. And I think that, finding the courage to be able to seek out an individual that would be prepared to champion and sponsor you within the organization is a very effective way of making sure that you have access to stretch assignments, projects, programs, cross-functionally, across geographies, business units, things like that are going to help you develop and showcase your experience.
We have one question from the audience on that, Kerris. So Angela asks, so in that program, did those people get promoted because they were in the program, or because being in the program made them more visible and top of mind for opportunities?
It's a good question, and I don't know that I've necessarily got the science behind it. I would suspect that it's a bit of both. I think that having had access to senior level and executives within our organization for those mentees was an opportunity to get noticed. But then I think as well that the mentors have been primarily very successful about helping individuals to seek out growth opportunities and to back themselves to have those advancement conversations that maybe they would have been too reticent or didn't feel qualified to do in the past. So I think it's a bit of both.
For sure. In terms of, I guess, when looking at sponsors and mentors as well, would you say it's, and this is for anyone, but would you say it's better kind of to find someone who's very similar to you, or someone who's completely different? And I guess, have you seen it at all in the workplace, whether it's been yourself with a mentor or a sponsor or a protege or a mentee, where you could really see that your skill sets kind of just combined and it was a really good partnership? So I open that up to anyone on the panel if you have any stories on sponsorship or mentorship going well.
Yeah, I can jump in here. I mean, you know, around kind of the question that you've posed, Alicia, as well as, you know, kind of to what Clayton and Kerris have already mentioned. Like, you know, I feel like from a personal perspective, you know, working through kind of my career progression and my journey, you know, I think I've taken part of, you know, the formal mentorship programs that the firm has to offer, as well as, you know, some of those relationships that I think informally develop during your journey, and where you develop relationships with mentors and advocates. I think, you know, at the end of the day, you need to make sure that relationship is a trusting relationship. It's, you know, a relationship, you know, where you feel comfortable and you feel safe, because I do think that is key. So, you know, I think, you know, thinking about, you know, that relationship from that perspective is important. So if I think about my own personal journey, like, you know, I've had a number of mentors and advocates over my career, you know, who played an important role in my journey. And, you know, when I think about, you know, the time in my career when having a mentor and an advocate or a sponsor was really key, was, you know, when I was making that move of being promoted from, you know, a senior manager to a partner. And for me, you know, that mentor was an individual who was another female partner, a partner by the name of Kate Ferber, who, you know, I worked closely with, and, you know, she supported me in ensuring that, you know, where, you know, the opportunities that might have not been in my control, that she was able to make sure I had a chance to have these experiences, and I was brought to the table for these opportunities. So, you know, she played a really important role in me being a partner here today, and even to this day continues to, you know, support me in my role as a partner. So, you know, I think it's trying to, you know, determine where best those relationships lie, whether they be within the organization, outside of the organization. And I think early on in your career, there's no harm in trying a few different ways of doing it, whether it be the formal programs, you know, whether it be organizations like Lean In, where you're building connections and relationships, or whether it be informally, where relationships naturally develop because of connections that you've made. So, you know, I always find working with different leaders with different styles, you always learn as a professional. So, you know, whether it's similar, I think, and that works, that's great for you. But if it's different, I think there's also an opportunity to, you know, see a different chain of thought, diversity in thought and approach. And there's always something to learn and take away from those relationships. I think the key is just, you know, building that network and making sure you've got that support system in place that you can draw on as it's needed.
I think as well, what I've found really interesting is, you know, as a leader, I think it's also part of my responsibility to seek out mentors for others in my team as well. And so whether it is, as you say, Raj, we're a part of a formal program and encouraging them to be a participant, either as a mentee or as a mentor, or, you know, through my own networks and recognizing, you know, the value and the excellence in others that I've got to know along the way that could be excellent mentors for individuals that are growing and developing within my team as well. I've made a couple of connections like that in the past, and I think you know, you can almost see a good potential match, and it definitely doesn't have to be somebody that you know, has taken the same path as you.
Yeah, for sure. So I can see that you're all very obviously passionate about diversity and inclusion for being on the panel, but I was wondering, kind of on that note as well, how do you in leadership ensure that your ideals and your commitments to diversity and equality and inclusion trickle down to the entire organization? So if there's, you know, middle management kind of below, or even at the junior level, how do you ensure that all of the different things that you kind of put into place, others feel as well? Maybe Clayton, you can take that one first.
Sure. I think tone at the top is just so critical there, and setting the example for the rest of the organization. I mean, it's proud to work in an organization that we're talking about gender diversity alone here, where 78% of our board is female, 71% of our executive team, and 64% of our managers. So we've made a lot of shift there. Now we have some ways to go when it comes to other dimensions of diversity and inclusion, and we're very open about that, and use the numbers to Kerris's point earlier to demonstrate the actions that we're taking and the progress that we're making. I mean, on top of that, I think we just need to make sure that there's room for the conversation. So I mentioned before the employee resource groups that we have in place, but one of the steps that we've taken recently is we've put we've set out we've been holding these town halls around diversity and inclusion, and in those town halls have been providing a space for those of different backgrounds and origins to talk about their stories of not feeling as though they felt included or have encountered barriers, whether they're at Vancity or elsewhere. And some of those conversations have been quite difficult and have forced us to recognize that there are still problems in the organization that we need to address and we need to get into. But they've been incredibly powerful at bringing a call to action across the organization. It's not just leadership saying we have to do this because it sounds like the right thing to do, but no, there's a necessity because there's a human element to this where nobody should feel at any point that because of where they come from, who they are, or whatever other ridiculous dimension, that they can't get to the same place as everybody else, or that they want to get to, that there's some sort of barrier. And so I think it's through actions like that. It's walking the talk, but also facilitating the conversation that will ultimately get us there.
Does anyone else have any thoughts on that one too, before we move on to the next one?
You know, I agree with the comments Clayton made. I think, you know, if I think about myself, you know, as a leader and kind of, you know, what it is that on a day-to-day basis that I try to do. And I think it's, you know, coming from a diverse background myself, being a visible minority, you know, I make sure I use my voice to, you know, make a positive impact and support other individuals with diverse backgrounds in being successful in their careers at PwC. So, you know, in these leadership roles, you have a direct impact to make sure that, you know, as leaders, we continue to prioritize diversity and inclusion, and it's part of that overall business strategy. So, you know, as a leader, you know, I really believe it's my responsibility to make sure I've got the courage every day to share my perspective, you know, challenge those unconscious biases that I might see because I'm more sensitive to it, being a visible minority, to really further drive that diversity and inclusion. So, you know, I want to make sure that, you know, others from diverse backgrounds really learn and benefit, you know, from my journey and my lessons learned that I've had in my journey. So, you know, that's why, you know, being a mentor and a champion for diversity and inclusion within the firm and in the business community, you know, has been important to me so that, you know, I'm doing my part to make sure, you know, we're continuing to move the dial, not only just from a gender perspective, but, you know, in terms of other forms of diversity as well. So I think, you know, it's also reflecting back and thinking like, what impact can I have as an individual on a day-to-day basis in the interactions I have? I really do think, you know, that is very powerful. And like I mentioned, when I reflect on my journey, I think that's probably been the biggest factor and what's had the most impact for me personally as well.
And then I guess kind of on that note as well, how in terms of like the company, but also your broader industries in general, because I know all of you are in pretty diverse industries, but how are you able to provide support, especially right now when there's a lot of burnout and there's flexibility in the workplace as people are building their careers and families at the same time? So how do you kind of support people through that, whether that be through mental health programs or anything else? Maybe Rob, you could kind of take that one first.
Sure, Alicia, thanks for the question. It's yeah, it's I mean, and this year, of course, there's been a ton of stress and anxiety loaded on all of us, and you know, particularly let's acknowledge, you know, COVID has disproportionately impacted women. You know, I was seeing some stats the other day. I think something like 60% of the jobs lost in the US and Spain were held by women. In Latin America, where Pan American operates, somewhere around 8 out of 10 women work in the informal sector, which of course has been devastated by COVID. And that's a sector that doesn't have much in the way of a safety net or benefits. And then, you know, we've seen terrible increase in domestic violence. And so COVID's really kind of exacerbated a lot of the pressures and stress that many women feel. You know, on the positive side, COVID, I think, has also given us an opportunity in some ways, in that it's accelerated the work of the future, and it's really caused us to think about how do we make the workplace more sustainable and reset the norms that we have around work-life balance. So for Pan American, there's probably two initiatives that I would touch on. As we in the mining business, which is prone to a lot of unconscious gender bias, we've really tried to combat that by through education and by creating an inclusive environment, and we've done that by putting together a program. We call it Building Respect Together, that all employees go through, and it's quite a comprehensive program that really looks at the root causes of some of these unconscious biases and some of the things that cause women and minorities not to feel included. And so, there's a deep analysis as to, what is culture, what are human values, what is bias, understanding awareness, trying to really develop acceptance and empathy, self-esteem, conflict resolution, effective communication, all of the motherhood stuff, teamwork, collaboration. But it's really important to create that environment so that diversity can actually flourish and be sustainable. So that's and we all have a role in order to set the right tone. I totally agree with what Clayton said around walking the talk. I mean, that's actions always speak louder than words, and that really resonated for me. In order to make people feel welcome and included, being inclusive is all about empathy and kindness, and that means really understanding the circumstances of each individual employee and what are their needs, and what can we do to help them in their circumstances, to support them to be happy and productive. That's good for the business, and it's good for employees. Actually, this morning I came across a really nice quote. If you'll indulge me for a second, it's just a couple of lines from Maya Angelou. She was an American poet and civil rights activist, and she wrote this: "I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." And to me, that really rung true, and it captures the concept of inclusion. It's really how you make people feel that's so critical. So we've really been working hard on that at Pan American. And then the other initiative that I would point to, and it's of course relevant at any time, but particularly as we all work from home, is just staying connected. That seems to be such a key thing. And one of the things that's been quite successful for us is a wellness survey that we just went through with actually all of our employees, and had really good response rates. And it gave us a really good pulse check on how people are doing, how they're handling the various stresses and strains of the world we find ourselves in, and again, anonymously done, but it really helped us to figure out how we can support people in a better way, what policies we need to be more flexible on, what things we can do to help various groups. So those are two initiatives that I think are working well and supporting people.
And just to add to that as well, I think there's a lot of great initiatives out there. I think one of the personal responsibilities I feel is to normalize being a mum. I have a 15-year-old daughter, teenage years, always fun, challenging, and the opportunity to actually do that during COVID has been abundant. Working from home, and when it became apparent that the kids weren't going back to school after spring break, and having to manage the home studies and schooling as well, she'd often be in the background when I didn't have a fancy background screen on. studying and all the rest of it. And so, you know, normalizing the fact that, you know, I have a life outside of work, and, you know, that life outside of work as a mum has meant that, you know, I have to prioritize, you know, both a family as well as my you know, work obligations. And a really great I can't talk about it verbatim, but a quote about juggling balls, but recognizing that not all of them are glass, some of them are plastic, and it's okay to drop a plastic ball with the family to be able to catch a glass ball for work, and it's okay to drop a plastic ball for work to catch a glass ball for family. So there's, you know, you really have to, you know, figure out where the priorities are, and I think normalizing that is really important. COVID especially, I think, shone a light on the fact that by sending everybody home for their personal health and safety meant that we had individuals working in so many different environments. You know, the obvious set that were immediately impacted were parents, especially with younger kids, trying to work core hours, be productive, and attend to the needs and be present for their children as well, who weren't in school and childcare. We actually had the opportunity to partner with a great local firm actually called Curve, and they provided, and we signed them up to provide 2-hour virtual enhancement education sessions for the kids of our employees, which basically gave them a 2-hour window to at least take a break or be productive, or you know, be away from having to kind of multitask. And it was hugely popular and very well received by our colleagues' families. And that was something that we did on a 3-week pilot basis and ended up taking it all the way through to the end of the school holidays in August. And it was a great opportunity to, you know, demonstrate that we recognized that people were really struggling in this space. But then, you know, that there's others that, you know, are living by themselves and are having to deal with isolation, you know, not being able to interact and, you know, the fact is that they would have used the work environment to have those social interactions, or a large part of them, or individuals that were living with, you know, 3 other housemates that were all, you know, vying for the Wi-Fi and for some space to have a work conversation. You know, there are many different circumstances, and it put a lot of pressure on people. There was a lot of psychological pressure. There's obviously the fear around physical health due to the pandemic itself. Then the economic situation provides, you know, that kind of financial stressor added into it as well. You know, is my job secure? Am I going to be able to pay the rent? You know, there's a lot of different stressors that were forced on people really quickly and very rapidly. And, you know, most people can deal with one significant change in their life at any one time, but then you throw 3 or 4 at them at one time, and you have to be there to be able to support them. So, you know, providing access to, you know, EFAP programs, making sure, you know, we brought in a great expert around mental wellness to do some webinars and some sessions with our people. We got people signed up to Headspace apps. We built out curated learning programs through LinkedIn Learning, which we have on our Workday platform, you know, around yoga, meditation, dealing with stress, becoming more resilient. You know, all of those things was really important. But I think the one thing that we really stressed, and this came top down right from the very top and throughout all of leadership, was the importance of leading with empathy. You know, our leaders and each of us had a responsibility to be empathetic, more tolerant, and understanding of other people's circumstances. And I think that is probably one of the most beautiful things that will come out of COVID, is that ability for us as individuals to recognize that, you know, we need to have more empathy and tolerance around other people's situations.
Well said.
And I guess kind of going forward from this, are there any specific initiatives anyone could kind of speak to on what do you think will stick around, something that's been kind of learned in COVID that we kind of hope will, I guess, continue on from after this experience as well?
I think this notion that everybody, well, not everybody, but many need a specific approach to work or a specific understanding of their circumstances, I hope persists past COVID. So, I mean, we had a very interesting leadership exercise where we did talk to individuals and just said, what do you need in this environment? Like, what will make things easier for you to manage, recognizing the stress that they were under? And it was incredibly powerful because not only did were we able to make very small but very powerful changes to schedules and things of that nature, or even just expectations around work, but it just forced the conversation to better understand someone's life. And we didn't even realize sometimes the challenges that individuals were dealing with. And so going to the, Kerris talking about empathy, I mean, it really opened the door for the conversation, and I think creates better understanding. So when that person drops the plastic ball, to use Kerris's analogy, it's easier to go, okay, that's likely because they've got their 3-year-old, like I do, at home that fell in the middle of the meeting, and that's why something happened, or when they were distracted that day, as opposed to simply going to, well, they're just not doing their job. And if we can keep that and hold that, I think we can be not only better organizations, but just a better society.
I would say for sure the flexible working environment. The commercial real estate industry as a whole, not just Colliers, I'm sure I can speak on behalf of the others, I think traditionally has had a very presenteeism culture where you're only considered to be working if you show up at 7 and leave at 7, and you're physically in the office doing the work. And I think that a lot of people in the first instance really struggle to get their mindset shifted towards managing performance on outcomes and deliverables, rather than physically seeing somebody and assuming that just because they're in the office they're working. But as we learn how to do this better, as we become more skilled at managing for outcomes rather than managing for presence, I think that enabling our people to feel empowered to be productive when it suits them, in a place that suits them, as long as they can deliver the outcomes that are required, I think is incredibly powerful. And so by retaining some of that aspect of it going forward, for me, would be the big win.
Totally agree with the comments that, oh, sorry. I was just going to say, totally agree with the comments that Clayton and Kerris have made. I think, I know we've talked a lot about empathy, and I think more than ever, this environment has caused, us, as leaders to really lead with empathy when, working with our teams and working with our people, and really understanding, what their personal circumstances are, so that you can accordingly understand, the different things that they're juggling, like Kerris has talked about, and understanding kind of, how you can maybe even better support them in their roles and the different things that they're managing on a day-to-day basis. So, hopefully, the trend of that, being able to work in that remote environment, and continuing to utilize technology to do that, I think is something that I think will continue to happen. So, I don't know what everyone else's personal experiences have been, but typically video calls pre-COVID, I felt like wasn't something that happened. It was either in face or a face-to-face conversation that you were having, or it was a phone call. And I think one of the things that's been so nice to see is, when you work with your international teams, you're getting to actually see them, because everyone's in this cadence of using video and turning on video, and trying in the best way possible to connect. Outside of obviously being able to do it face to face, so that creates the opportunity, to have a lot of these, conversations still in a remote environment, but be able to actually, see each other and see the reactions and see the emotions. So, I think continuing to that trend of not having to travel, kind of all over the country, all over the world for some of these meetings, is going to be able to increase, some of that flexibility and balance for people, hopefully going forward, and that trend will continue.
Sure, and Kerris, at one point you also had mentioned isolation, and I noticed that as well. And it kind of reminded me of one other point of, as women kind of advance in their career, sometimes they're likely to become the only woman in the room, which is kind of isolating as well. So I was wondering if any, and this is open to anyone, but do you have anything in your companies or that you've noticed in the industry that helps with recognition of the only issue? And what are some steps that can be taken to address that issue as well? Kerris, did you want to maybe start on that one?
Sure, yeah, and have been the only woman in the room a number of times. prior to working commercial real estate, which can again be, historically very male dominated. Worked in pulp and paper manufacturing, resources mining. So yeah, can certainly familiarize myself with that sentiment of being the only woman in the room, and it can be an incredibly daunting situation. I think, in terms of formalizing that at Colliers, we've not gone that far, but I think one of the things that we have recognized is that by running inclusive leadership training mandated for all of our people leaders, that is part of the topic that gets discussed. It's part of many topics that get discussed, so that our leaders can create and foster an environment of inclusivity. And so, if there is an individual that is leading a team and currently that there's one woman in the room, or one other person of visible minority or whatever it might be, then that they're able to stop, think, and act accordingly, and make sure that they're that they're providing an environment that fosters that inclusivity, and encouraging individuals to have a voice at the table, to have that seat at the table, to own that seat at the table, and feel not just welcome there, but that they absolutely have a right to be there. And I think that inclusive leadership training has enabled our leaders, as we've had those kind of quite blunt and sometimes awkward and uncomfortable conversations in small groups, to share those experiences with others and look for opportunities to learn from each other around that as well. And there's many of our kind of senior male leaders who have only for the first time really had an open conversation with another female leader, to say, I know what it feels like to be the only woman in the room, or I know what it feels like to be the only whatever. And that is something that I think has been really powerful, that I don't think a lot of our male leaders felt they had permission to really kind of get into in any depth. So that's been an interesting exercise for sure.
So I clearly can't speak to the experience, but I can speak to some of the things that we're doing. We've also been, in addition to sort of all the similar things to what Kerris was just explaining in terms of training and education across the organization, we've also brought in an external organization called Collaboratorio, who's been helping analyze our processes internally, both sort of internal to the employee experience, but also things like our lending practices. And with a specific view at looking at trying to uncover some of those unconscious biases that may exist within our processes, and whether in the forms of racism or barriers to progress, success, or even just simply creating an engaging working environment. And we've also engaged this to look at whether it's women or cognitive diversity, racial diversity, any aspect of it. I think we haven't seen the results of that yet because we're just in the early stages of it, but I think that'll be an interesting process to bring almost a third-party perspective to how we can improve things.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess from all of the different, this goes for everyone again, but all the different policies, and whether it's third parties or procedures or cultural enhancements your respective industries and organizations have implemented within the last few years, can you speak on any tangible benefits and impacts that have arisen from the programs that were implemented in the past, and kind of what you're doing now based on the findings of those policies and procedures? Rob, maybe we'll start with you for this one.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. And Clayton, I'd love to hear more about that external review. I think every organization could benefit from that perspective. Yeah, as far as tangible things, actually, there's two I would point to. One is not gender specific. It's in fact around language. Pan American is English is actually the third most common language in the company. Spanish, of course, is the dominant tongue, and then there's a language called Quechuan, which is spoken in the highlands of Peru and Bolivia, and that's the second most common language. And then us corporate stiffs are the English speakers. And so one of the things that we did a number of years ago is that all of our management meetings and any important budget meetings or anything like that, we simply have a translation service, and of course it works great virtually as well. So, but even in-person meetings back in the old days, we'd always have a translation service, and it really has been wonderful because it very tangibly allows people to express their views and participate in their mother tongue and feel valued, and that their opinion matters, and they're not, struggling for words and so that's been a really tangible way of making people feel included and participating. So that's been a good one. The other one that I would say has been quite successful in kind of professional development is establishment of task forces, and this is something that we've been doing with, and very much with the diversity ambition to it. So sort of hand selecting a group of young stars in the organization, and from a diverse background, and also with different responsibilities, maybe someone from finance, someone from operations, someone from tax, and then throwing them a task and asking them to go and work together. And in our case, we have 6 different jurisdictions, countries that we operate in. So we've also been able to cross-pollinate across countries and create these little teams. And it's been fabulous to see the team dynamic at work, and again, providing opportunities, breaking down barriers, giving someone that may not ordinarily get a chance to present to the CEO or whatever, a real development opportunity, and so those mini task forces have been great for that, and they've actually come up with some great recommendations for improvement opportunities as well. So those 2 have worked very well for us.
I can speak to some very specific examples where I can't point to any one policy, but I can point to the combination of things that happened well before I got to Vancity, but luckily that exists here. Whether that's we have an 85% top up for parental leave over the entire 18-month timeframe, and not only that though, it's just a more culturally acceptable thing than I've seen in past organizations at Vancity. And what that's manifested itself into is not only what I've seen is individuals more likely to return to work because they get more time, and it's easier to spend, not easier, but I guess less of a challenge to stay home with your kids. But we also see more of the men in our organization going off and using that program as well. So there's better balance to that childcare and better integration of families, I think, in raising their children. And so there's absolutely a business case for diversity and inclusion, and that manifests in terms of better decisions and better outcomes for the organization. But there's also just outright retention of key individuals from time to time, and the ability to foster stronger family relationships. And if people are happier at home and stronger at home, then they're going to be better at the workplace. So I think we can look beyond the straightforward results for organizations and realize that some of these gains are more long-term.
Yeah, for sure. Raj or Kerris, did you have anything to maybe add on that as well?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things, and I know that you touched on the kind of industry aspect of it as well, and I think that we've seen some huge developments in the commercial real estate space. We've had strong ties with an organization, for example, called CREW, which is commercial real estate women, for many years, and one of our senior leaders in the US is a director on their board, on their global board, and that's been a huge benefit to be able to kind of tap into resources. We provide scholarships for individuals, for female professionals in our organization to attend the annual conference, things like that. So that kind of interaction has been great. BOMA in Canada, Building Operators Association, a Managers Association, has recently started up a diversity, inclusion and equity board, of which I've been invited to be on, and have been able to interact with a number of professionals across different organizations within my industry sector, and that again I think is really kind of fostering that collaboration. This isn't a competition for us to be better than our competitor at diversity and inclusion. This is a problem, an issue, and a challenge for all of us to come together and solve. And I think that that aspect of it is really how we're going to move forward at scale. Because if we just focus internally on our own organizations, we run the risk of not being able to make the kind of measurable scale that we're all seeking. And so by sharing in that responsibility and not using it as a point of competition, I think is super valuable, and that's created a great platform for that. So those kind of things have given us the opportunity to bring learnings and other best practices and other programs and initiatives to the fore that we may have not have thought about ourselves. So I think that's a great opportunity for that the industry itself is actually coming together to try and solve this.
Sure. Roger, did you have? Oh yeah, sorry, go.
Oh, sorry, I just realized I was on mute. From a PwC perspective, I was just going to say, kind of similar things to what the different panelists have already kind of touched on in terms of, whether it be task forces, different, diversity and inclusion initiatives. I know I've talked about a women in leadership program already, and some of the stats around that. But, I think one of the things that really came from, the leadership and our CEO and, the leadership team was setting the aspirational goal of saying, of achieving 50-50 gender split with respect to partner admissions across the country and ultimately across the partnership. So, in setting, in being, I think a couple of things there was giving the organization enough time to work towards that goal was key, and really being determined to fulfill that goal was important as well, because in setting an aspirational goal like that, it really focuses the business leaders to kind of look at what the pipeline looks like and be able to kind of identify those gaps and, really try to understand the reasons for those gaps and to action them accordingly, right? So I think, having those aspirational goals and, continuing to monitor the progress and we have seen that progress from that perspective around, the partner admissions and the 50-50 split really helps keep the organization focused. And it's been great to see kind of the success as a result of that.
Oh, for sure, that's awesome. And then I guess that kind of brings us to the last question before our Q&A. So this is open to everyone, and I just want to know, from everything we've kind of learned today, what can each of us do right now that will help bring us closer to gender diverse leadership and equal opportunity for the foreseeable future? Maybe Clayton, we'll start with you on this one.
Sorry, just give me a second to hit the mute button there. I think listen and challenge ourselves is the key thing. Force ourselves to look at the uncomfortable truths about why groups are structured the way that they're structured, and then get into why that's happening, and have some of those uncomfortable conversations. Because we can implement all the policies that we want, but if we're not changing the way that we're making decisions, and if we're not changing the way that we look at the world, we're not going to get the change that we wish to see here. That's all I have to say.
Perfect. And then does anyone else want to, maybe Rob, do you want to speak on that as well?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Alicia. Yeah, I think we're doing it right now. I've taken a ton of notes and really thank the other panelists for inspiring some ideas. Learning from each other, I think is really important. And as Clayton says, to have these conversations and and learn from others. I mean, in the mining industry, BHP, for instance, is way ahead of us, and I commend PwC. I know you've shown a lot of leadership in diversity and inclusion, and I've been to some great sessions there. So it's really being just continuing to educate ourselves and then most importantly walk the talk, because if it stays in here, it's not helping anyone.
I would echo that. I think one of the key things is recognizing the difference between intention and action. So to your point, Rob, intention is great, but it does not make change. So you have to act on those intentions. And one of the things I think that I'd highlight that I think is important is right now, and especially in the virtual environment, things can get missed or overlooked because we're not interacting necessarily in the same way as before. So being really intentional around having career development conversations with people and making sure that there's a real understanding around what the aspirations and goals are of the people in your team, and then being able to translate those into opportunities for development, I think is really important right now.
Agree with kind of all the comments that the panelists have made. I think one of the things I would say is the tone of the top, which I know we've talked about previously. And I think at the end of the day, the CEO of an organization is accountable for that diversity and inclusion, and and should be for all organizations. As we've talked about, it's a business imperative, right? I think at the end of the day, if you look at it, diverse teams and having people feel supported and comfortable in the environment that they work in only leads to positive results and good outcomes from a business perspective as well. So, diversity and inclusion really does need to be embedded within the organization's, DNA, and ensuring that, it's part of the purpose, the mission, the values, and, it's purpose-driven, it's values-led is really key, and making sure it's embedded in the business strategy. And the accountability sits with, all of those who influence the decisions that are being made, right? So I know there's different forms of leaders within an organization, but for anybody that's, coaching or has a team, I think there is that level of accountability. And I think metrics and accountability are critical just to ensuring that progress is actually being made. So I think, continuing to self-reflect, assess that. And, I know we've talked a lot about it, but, I don't think underestimate, the leading with empathy, care, and making those personal connections and acting, as an advocate, mentor on a day-to-day basis, because I think oftentimes as a leader and having had the journey I have, I will be the one that reaches out to different individuals, to be able to just connect, to share my experiences, and add whatever value I can to just drive that objective at the end of the day to make sure you're creating a diverse and inclusive culture.
There's some great last insights. Thank you, everyone. So now I invite everyone in the chat and who's on the discussion right now to type in any live questions you may have. I know we have one or a few in the chat, so I'll read those out. And so the first one is, it says, while diversity and inclusion has received rising recognition and integration into business practice, this one's for Raj here, what are challenges that a visible minority, as you brought up, could face while attempting to be more vocal about their own perspective from your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll share my personal kind of experiences, and I know I've touched a little bit on my journey. I think, going up through the organization, I was always the type of person that would, kind of put my head down, make sure I was doing good work, making sure I was serving my clients well, reporting into kind of managers and partners, taking full ownership for kind of engagements as well as the team. And, I think in my own way, there were a lot of other initiatives that I was taking part of as well, both within the firm as well as in the business community. But, I think I've always had the philosophy that actions always speak louder than words. And I think, sometimes that necessarily was something that didn't get recognized by some of the leaders, But I think, I had to find a way for myself still to be authentic as who I am as an individual, because, I really like to make sure it is my actions and my results that are speaking for themselves. And I think that's where then having a mentor and sponsor and advocate who has an understanding of the contributions that you're making and your skills and capabilities to be able to, represent you at that leadership table was really key. So, I think at the end of the day, you have to be authentic to who you are as an individual and how you operate. And I think it's finding those right advocates, mentors, and sponsors within the organization who are going to help, support you in achieving your objectives. And I think, the other part of that is, I think as a leader, you have to have the courage to be able to call out that unconscious bias. And I don't think, it's not always an easy exercise. And, having different perspectives isn't always easy, but I think, that's where, coming from a different background, and everybody does, I think you've got different thoughts and different perspectives. And I think being able to share those with kind of, the other leaders and your peers is really important to make sure that, you are really driving change and you're making sure you're being inclusive and diverse as an organization.
Perfect. And then we have one more near the top. And I think this one was touching on what I think maybe Kerris and Rob had said earlier. But in terms of those surveys you had touched on, what are the participation rates of the voluntary surveys for diversity metrics?
Yeah, ours is less of a survey and more of an ongoing effort to encourage people to self-identify within our HR system. So we do a annual engagement survey every year that does contain some diversity-related questions, but doesn't look to ask people about their own self-identification metrics. So the thing that we've been focusing on more recently is, how can we encourage participation of as many people as possible to self-identify within our HR tool voluntarily and confidentially, that will enable us to drive those metrics. So, we're still early days. It's only been, I think, a month and a half maybe since we enabled that functionality, and we've been doing some communications and messaging, broad communications and messaging around it. But it's starting to trickle up each month as we see people kind of participating. But yeah, it wasn't necessarily a survey so much, but our engagement survey, we used to get over 90% participation in, so we did get a good understanding of how people's sentiments are developing or changing when it comes to our approach to diversity and inclusion as an organization. Hope that helps.
Perfect. And then we have one more coming in through. So this is for everyone, I believe. So how do you bring up conversations relating to equity and diversity to senior management, especially when you're in a more junior role? Maybe Clayton, we'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, I think it's important to find those in those senior manager roles that are open to listening and are champions of diversity, inclusion, and forcing change across the organization, and starting there. I mean, because not only that, it'll be a more comfortable, safe conversation, I think, but more likely to resonate and drive the change. Hopefully that's not a hard individual to find in the organization, and if so, then perhaps there's more structural change that's necessary to get there. I don't know if that's a good answer, but that would be my best recommendation there.
Yeah, I would also recommend asking them the question, what are your thoughts on diversity and inclusion within our organization? Or, is our organization planning to do anything new or different around diversity and inclusion? And it kind of, doesn't, it's not attacking, but at the same time, it's curious probing of information around what that organization's plans are. So, or even the opportunity to say, hey, I've got some recommendations around diversity and inclusion. I'd love to discuss those with you.
Perfect. And this one's just building off of that last question as well. How do you find out about equity and diversity in an interview setting when you're first interviewing with a company?
Happy to take that one, Alicia. I would say it's just, having the courage to ask that question and understand what some of those diversity inclusion initiatives look like. Some of those metrics might look like from a leadership perspective. I think the important thing to keep in mind is, when you're going through an interview process, you as the interviewee are always also trying to understand if this organization is the right place for you. So I think, I know it's sometimes harder in those more junior roles to realize that. And it's always the advice I give to, alumni colleagues, individuals I mentor, whether it be within or outside of the firm, is it's important for you to keep in mind that, you know what your values are, what is important to you, and finding an organization where that is aligned and you're going to feel comfortable and supported is key and important. So, I think it's just a matter of asking the question. And again, like Kerris said, doing it in a respectful way. But I think, everyone has a right to understand what that is, what a company's diversity and inclusion initiatives are and what their focus and priorities are in that area.
People ask it all the time in interviews now. Candidates are, I would say 8 times out of 10, that question comes up in an interview. So you wouldn't be the first and definitely not unique in asking that question. So companies should be ready to answer. And if they're not, then maybe that's not the right company.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Well, I think that's all the questions. I'll maybe wait for one more minute if anyone has any last questions to kind of put through. But other than that, I just wanted to say thank you so much to everyone, both on this call and to our panelists as well. I really did enjoy this discussion, and I hope everyone learned at least a thing or two. I know that I did. But yeah, if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out. And once again, if you want to join Lean In, you can go into our website after this as well. But apart from that, I hope everyone has a lovely evening and a great rest of your week. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Yeah, thanks.
All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alicia, for moderating.
Thanks, Alicia. Great job.
Thanks, Alicia.
Yeah.
Have a good evening, everyone.
You too.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.